Hello explorers, thanks for joining us again and welcome back to another informative video on our YouTube channel. On today's episode, we are looking deep into the infrastructural problems that the African continent experiences at the moment. Have you ever been worried about the infrastructural problems that the African continent is experiencing at the moment? Have you asked yourself the question why, 60 years after independence of most African countries, the infrastructural problems is still something that prevails at the moment? For those of you who visited our channel in the past, you will realize that we talk about informative and educating content from the African continent. We take on different topics and we are not shy away to take big topics. In this episode, we shall look into the infrastructural gap in the continent. What are the ambitions that the continent is pursuing at the moment, and why this private sector is lacking in its contribution to the African infrastructural development? More importantly, we will close this episode with considering the gaps that does exist and the investment facilities that the urgency that the African continent needs. So without any more delay, we should just go straight into it. Africa as a continent suffers from poor quality and expensive infrastructural services compared to other parts of the world. It is estimated that this constrains productivity by up to 40% and reduces the continent's GDP by about 2% per year. With the imminent enforcement of the African continental free trade, which is ongoing at the moment, and it's also going to be one of the largest in the world considering the capacity and the trade that is involved in this continental region, the urgency for infrastructural development the continent needs more than ever before. On the top of the African's limited existing infrastructure, it's already being severely impacted by extreme events associated with things like climate change. But before I jump into that, allow me explain this to you. Most recently, I was reading an article from a very popular newspaper that talked about 8 African countries have been stripped of their home advantage in next month's World Cup qualifiers as a result of their matches being moved to a different location. Those countries include Burkina Faso, the Central African Republic, Djibouti, Guinea-Bissau, Malawi, Mali, Niger, and this list goes on and on, has been moved to those different places as a result of poor infrastructure. Considering these as a result to the Qatar's World Cup coming up, their venues failed inspection by the team from Confederation of African Football. The changes confirm the list of fixtures that FIFA brought forward with regards to the competition. The question here is that after 60 years from most of these African countries, why is infrastructure a big issue? As the continent hasn't realized that infrastructural development is a pressing priority. So in this episode, here are some of the reasons and the reason why the continent should invest in this area in transforming the entire continent to make sure that Africa, not just in speaking, is also taking words in action.
Without infrastructure and energy, a continent that will be integrated in terms of trade and logistics will not be a reality.
If you want to transform your economy from primary dependence on raw material to manufacturers, you need energy. Whether you are talking about trade, whether you are talking about industrialization, those things will not happen if we don't have good infrastructure. So the case for infrastructure and energy development has been made.
Looking at the impact that infrastructure does has as regards to this, 60 years after independence, you want to believe that some countries should be able to offer more than 5 or 10 stadiums. The fact that a football match is being banned or moved to another country that as a result of poor infrastructure in stadiums, the question is, how much does a stadium cost? How much can you build and maintain a football stadium with football glory within the continent and around the African continent itself? You will believe that a football stadium should be something that should be one of the pinnacles in terms of the infrastructural development. But the fact that over 60 years independence, most of those countries that I mentioned are still struggling to have a mere football stadium which they could host a football match which could bring income to their own country and also bring joy with regards to the funds in those countries, then there is a problem with regards to infrastructure in the continent. In this episode, this is the reason why the continent needs to invest hugely and resolve the challenges that it experiences in terms of infrastructural problem. The Infrastructural Consortium for Africa indicates that over 81 billion of investments were committed to infrastructural development, considering that in 2017 based on our research. As illustrated in concerning the operations within the continent, the volume of infrastructure is still far shorter as regards to the up to 170 billion US dollars a year by 2025 needed to close Africa's infrastructural gap.
Of Africa's infrastructure has a direct impact for trade, the cost of trade. Take for instance the transport situation of the continent. Inadequate transport infrastructure raises transport costs, transaction costs, which makes Africans' products not competitive.
The African private sector needs to play its role. They should have room to contribute a little bit more. If you look at the overall African infrastructural development, the African private sector plays a limited role. It could be for a number of reasons, but if the private sector involves in the infrastructure and development in the continent, you will see a complete transformation. Of the 81 billion invested, as of 42% came from national governments, and 23% came from China, and 24% came from bilateral donors and multilateral agencies and also African institutions. By contrast, the private sector accounted for just 2.8% if you look at this particular area. Most of the investment that came in included things like in transportation, energy, and also water projects, all sectors that are sensitive to adverse impact of the climate change. The continent has to transform its infrastructural development. If you look at the gap that's needed to be closed, Africa infrastructure and huge investment needed to close the gap. If you look at this part, major investment would have to come from private sector. So there is growing demand for institutions to declare climate risk exposure of their investment. This presents great opportunity for the African continent to transform in this area. As an infrastructural development outcome, Africa can also take advantage of the advances in innovation, the falling cost of low carbon technologies, and also need for diversifying and also strengthening the microeconomic basis of the economies. It can also lead from the experience of other global regions in order to leapfrog and build infrastructure that is from the outset robust, resources and efficient and able to perform both today and in tomorrow's uncertain climate environment. It is so important that the continent should be able to focus on those areas that is most needed its infrastructure. Transforming the economies of the African countries to attain their development objectives requires widespread access to modern and sustainable infrastructure. A world-class infrastructure that crisscrosses the continent is going to be a key area in terms of the requirements for attaining an African renaissance. It is so important that the African continent transform in this area. That's all what we got for you with regards to infrastructural challenges in the African continent. If you feel that it's not fair after 60 years that the continent is still falling behind with regards to infrastructural development, we would like to hear from you. If you feel that we were able to move on with regards to infrastructural growth and expansion is needed considering the African continental free trade, it's essential to also hear from you. If you've been to the continent and you're coming from one of those countries that faces challenges with regards to infrastructure in any area, we would like to hear your comments. For now, I want to thank you for watching the Explorer. We're looking forward to meeting you soon. If you are joining us for the first time, we encourage you to watch some of our other videos, watch our entire episodes, and also give us a like. We want to thank you for watching our channel. We're looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode, and have a good day. Bye-bye.